Hello, welcome back. I am your host, Matthew Pfeiffer, and today I have on a very special guest, Amanda Hill, and I cannot wait to have this conversation with you guys. You guys know how we do things around here. You know, I like to bring on attorneys that I would either hire myself or I would refer to friends or family members, myself or my friends and my family members. And so today we have a great topic. We have a great subject, had thousands of episodes at this point. But I don't think we've talked about military divorces. I don't think we've talked about divorcing when you and your significant other have owned businesses together, or maybe you have a lot of different assets together. And so we'll talk about all those different things. But before we get into the meat of our topic today, let me introduce you to our guest, Amanda. Thank you so much for allowing for us to pick apart your brain and your experience. I'm going to kick it over to you. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and where your practice is at.
Yes. Hi. Thanks. So happy to be here. So I actually practice mostly exclusively family law in the San Diego greater area. We also take some cases in Orange County as well, but mostly San Diego. I've been working in the family law arena for over 15 years. I started my own practice after working at a very large law firm in downtown San Diego for several years with my business partner, Sarah. She practices other areas of law, but I would say about 80 to 90% of our practice right now is family law.
Did you, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you start out was your goal always to be a family law attorney, or did you kind of back into it?
You know, when I was an undergrad, I did a fellowship program called Justice Corps at the Norwalk, which is in Los Angeles County courthouse. And it was specifically a self-help clinic that they had at the courthouse. And it dealt with domestic violence and divorce and paternity issues. And that's really where I found my passion. I was only like 20 years old, and I was helping people who couldn't afford legal representation. And I got essentially a scholarship to help people over the summer at that courthouse. And I was there 40 hours a week working in that clinic. And I learned very quickly that it was something that I felt really good about, giving back to the community, giving those hours. And I always joke around about this with a lot of my fellow attorney colleagues. I feel like family law is kind of like country music. You either love it or hate it. And there's not really an any between. And I'm one of those, I guess you can say, weirdos that really am passionate about family law, because I feel like it's one of those areas of law that's unique because you are helping someone on the day-to-day, and also oftentimes are dealing and helping with someone who is going through probably one of the worst and most difficult parts of their life, which is maybe a custody dispute or a full-blown divorce.
Yep. I always say that that it's also very life-changing, and oftentimes, I'll say oftentimes, because that's definitely not the case for everybody, but oftentimes a life-changing event for everyone, typically in a positive way. It hurts initially, but after people kind of get their legs under them and things like that, oftentimes it sets a new trajectory for their life, oftentimes for their kids' lives. And when it's done right, a lot of times it leads to a lot of contentment and a lot of happiness for that person for the future as well. So I've met a lot of attorneys who have great relationships with their clients, things like that, because of that. And I don't think I think people take for granted the attorney-client relationship in situations like this, because you're dealing with a lot of intimate details of their life. I mean, oftentimes with cheating, so you know about people's bedroom life. Oftentimes you know about people's financials. Oftentimes, and it leads to, I know a lot of people on this podcast have said that they felt like they were one part attorney and another part therapist. Is that something you share as well?
Absolutely. It's very interesting that I tend to see, and even more so now as the years go on and the more years I practice, I have, for example, recently a client that hired me who was referred to me by his cousin. He literally was like, "You help my cousin. I don't care how much you cost. I need your help because the mother of my child is driving me nuts," right? For example, right? I also just last week had somebody call me and say, my pool guy told me that I just need your help because he heard what's going on with me. And it seems like you help people alleviate stress. And that's it, right? Like that's what my role really is. It's not to, I'm not a magician, I should say. I can't always appease everybody's, goals, because sometimes people come to you and they're like, I just want to get him back. I don't care what it takes. I'm not that kind of an attorney. That's not certainly, the way I work. But it is something, and it is always a goal for me working with my clients to make sure that we, right from the beginning and working with each other, we establish what their goals are, and then we have a good discussion about whether those are reasonable goals, whether it makes sense for their particular circumstances, and whether it's feasible, whether those outcomes are feasible. So I think in being able to be very real from the very beginning and having those conversations with my clients, good, bad, or ugly, they really appreciate that, because there are some people out there that, they will say whatever they can to get the client on because they're trying to, get another client.
Right.
But that's certainly not how I practice.
Right. Absolutely. I'm going to get into the goals here in a second, but something that I'm very passionate about, and I've actually gotten in trouble for saying this, and online and in videos. But you're right in terms of, and I'm coming from a therapy background, but when people try to get back at their significant other or their former significant other, or they're using the divorce as a way for revenge or vengeance or justice, time and time again, I've seen that that's typically where that person typically fails. And not only fails, but typically fails miserably. I'm going to give my 2 cents in on the reasons why, why I have seen and why I've experienced that with clients, but wanted to get your perspective on why you might feel that way, or why you might have, what you might have seen in situations like that as well.
Sure. So, I like to call it weaponizing the divorce process, right? It's really prevalent. I'll be honest with you. Some females maybe get upset with me about this because I'm a female myself, but I tend to see it more so with cheating allegations, and I tend to see it more so when it's a female being cheated on or scorned, and they have that mentality. What my approach has always been is to have a very good conversation with them, even during that initial consult, of making sure that they're in the right headspace to start the process and do it in such a way that makes sense. Yeah. Because I have seen multiple times where somebody comes to me, they're in that headspace. We start off that way, even though I've warned them, and then halfway through, they racked up a huge bill and they're not satisfied, because in reality, they're looking for something that they're never going to get from doing it. And so, and I've also gotten better at screening clients and making sure that it's a good fit, because if I really feel like someone is on a vendetta, I oftentimes will say, I don't know if this is the best fit. You might want to look for another attorney, because there are plenty of other attorneys out there that they can hire that would be happy to do whatever their client's telling them. And that's just
pay for it.
Yeah.
They're going to pay for it, but yeah.
Yeah, they're going to pay for it. But here's the thing. I got to sleep at night. I got to feel good about the way I'm practicing law, the way my team is practicing and handling cases. And that's just not really my personality.
Yeah. And when I say that they're going to pay for it, also more for those of you who are listening, on the more emotional side, it doesn't work.
No.
Even if, and I can tell you time and time again where I've had people in my office where they actually got what they wanted, the high child support bill or whatever, or they, proved their point in court, that they proved that the allegations of infidelity were true, and they, so they got their gotcha moment, or whatever that is that you want to call it, and the person didn't react the way that you anticipated. It didn't affect them the way that you thought they would. Oftentimes, because they weren't out for revenge or whatever, they just said, okay, so be it, and they moved on. And when that person has that ability to move on, a lot of times it impacts that person, because that whole vengeance and that whole revenge thing, it literally just continues to eat away at itself where, you literally can't pull yourself away. It's one thing after another. And you just start going down this hole that you just can't really, you can, but it's difficult to climb yourself out of by going for revenge. And if you're not careful, I think that, you hit the nail on the head. You don't want any part of that because you just know that it's just a dead end road.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the other things that I do with my clients early on in the working relationship is I kind of try to gauge what additional resources they may be needing or could be helpful for them as they navigate the divorce process, because it's a long process oftentimes. In the state of California, it's a minimum of 6 months, right? So it's a long process. And I often will gauge whether there's additional resources that could be helpful for them. And when I do that, one of those things is therapy, or maybe is a co-parenting coach, right? I've developed a list of other professionals who are not attorneys that I think can be very helpful for them. And those clients that choose to utilize those other resources, I have seen a tremendous difference. Like, I'm talking night and day. The earlier they work with those individuals in that divorce process, then instead of, for some reason, sometimes people feel like, you know what, I'll deal with that when I'm all done with this. Yeah. But it's counterintuitive, in my opinion, because no, you need this now because you're going to need those allies and those assistants from the beginning of this process.
And not only that, but even afterwards. So you said that, the divorce process, a lot of times people think the divorce process is 6 months, 2 years. I tell people that oftentimes it's 10 plus years, depending on how old your children are. Because even afterwards, even after the divorce is final, you're still divorced. So there's still a process that goes in terms of co-parenting, in terms of actually executing on things that the court has granted. And, so you're 100% right. I think that you have to have a community, you have to have a team behind you, because for you, even if this is your second divorce, even if this is your third divorce, which sounds like a lot to a lot of people, that's still not near the level of experience that you may have had. I mean, you probably see 10 divorces a day. I know when I was practicing, I would see multiple people per day. So relying on other people's experience just makes such a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. The one of the things that I've seen a lot of, and it creates a really difficult dynamic, is when two people they're not W-2 employees. So their finances in terms of their income aren't necessarily mingled together and things like that. And they built this, sometimes a very beautiful company, very beautiful business that they've run together. Both names are on it. They're 50-50 owners, and it's nice when it works, but when people start going through a divorce, this can become a huge, huge headache. And that's something that it sounds like you've seen a lot of. What happens? How does that work when two people like share a business or have built a business together, and both people either want ownership of it, or how do people start breaking things like that up?
Sure. Well, my first tip is always get a prenup. It's always the best, because a lot of times the people that reach out to me that I do help them with prenups, they often have businesses or assets they're trying to protect. But what people don't know is that you can include terms in the prenup, at least in the state of California, that addresses future asset retention, right? You can, what would happen if in the future certain assets are acquired, including a business, and exactly all the details of what that would mean upon dissolution of the marriage. So there's no question of what's going to happen. So I am always a huge advocate of prenups. But if that doesn't exist and there's litigation that ensues, one of the biggest things is making sure that there is sufficient discovery, which is just the legal term of financial disclosures on both sides of what the asset is, in this case, a business, and what it entails. Oftentimes in California, what we end up doing is we hire an expert to do a business evaluation. Usually it's jointly retained, called a Evidence Code 730 expert. and they will be jointly retained by both parties to go through the books, look at the business, interview those that are involved in the business, including both parties usually, and figure out what the actual value of the business is, to then disperse that report and analysis to both sides or both counsel to then figure out, okay, based off of this analysis, what's feasible and what we can do with this business, right? And that's really going to depend on, who wants to keep the business, who is, the managing person related to the business. Is it something to where somebody's just a name partner, but really that's just on paper, right? So that's going to come down to the more individual based business in each case. But absolutely, whenever we have a business at issue, unless we're talking about somebody who's just a 1099, consultant and works with different companies, and that's really it, sometimes we can get away with not hiring an expert in that case. But if we're talking about an S Corp, we're talking about a business that has multiple employees, has been around for years, I would say more likely than not, we're going to have an expert come on the case to value the business.
Something I've seen a lot of, I'm sure you have as well. What does someone do when you have a person that is, whether it's intentional or unintentional, trying to put the business under, to try to sabotage or try to make, whether it's they're trying to make it seem like, or they just feel literally that sense of entitlement, doing things like wiping the business bank account clean, or overpaying themselves, messing with the books. I remember there was a person who I was working with that one of the parties was literally destroying parts of the business, and trying to claim that it was always like that, and this person was running the business under, when it was really them sabotaging and everything. It seems like things like that, I don't want to say are common, but they definitely happen. Is that something that you've seen before?
Yeah, I don't see it too often because most savvy business owners, unless they are really just trying to get back at their spouse, are going to know that if they're, going to do something that's going to negatively impact the business, it's in turn going to impact them as well.
Yeah.
But in California, we have something called a breach of fiduciary duty, a requirement. And it's very, very clear laid out in the California Family Code that says that regardless of whether you're still married to that person, and this is even after the divorce is finalized, if you have any entities or assets, including a business that you own with that person, you continue to owe them a fiduciary duty, just as if you were a business partner with that person, separate and apart from being, spouses. To maintain any assets that you jointly own. And if you don't, you can be fined by the court. And in fact, I have had to go to court to file a breach of fiduciary duty claim. For example, there was an asset at issue, and it did relate to, in that example, a nail salon. And they were trying to sell the property that they had for the salon. And one of the spouses was trying to sell it from up under the other spouse, in this case, my client. And we had to go in ex parte, file an emergency order to put a freeze on all their assets to make sure that sale did not go through. And again, that was more so in a case where there was just clearly a lot of animosity between the parties, and they were not thinking clearly. And we were able to get that court order, but, what a mess. And luckily, there is a code in the code section that protects you from that. But the hope is that, you're not in those situations for sure.
What happens, in situations where both people still want to run the business, still want to own the business? For all intents and purposes, it is 50-50. Maybe one person runs the marketing, the other person, takes care of operations or something along those lines. Does it just get split, or does the court just tell people that, hey, y'all, you just need to work on this together and put your differences aside? How does that work out?
So most of the time, if an asset can't be amicably divided, the court is going to order that it be sold. Similarly how they deal with a house, right? Yeah. If the parties own a house jointly and they can't agree on how it will be resolved, then you show up at trial, the court's just going to say, well, guess what? In 60 to 90 days, this house has to be listed for sale.
Yeah.
My experience has been it's pretty similar with the business. Most of the time, though, my experience has been that one spouse, because they can't get along in their communications, usually wants to be out. But in that more rare situation, at least in my experience, you can be as detailed as it's possible in what's called the marital settlement agreement that determines all the details about how everything is going to be resolved as far as who's going to run the business, what they're going to be required to do. One of the more common situations I see is people who own rental properties, and one of them is managing those rental properties. And we write in the marital settlement agreement exactly what responsibilities that one spouse will have and what the other spouse will do as well. And usually there'll be a catch-all phrase in the settlement agreement that says that if at any point after the divorce judgment is entered, either party wants to change these terms, the court reserves jurisdiction to go back to court and say, hey, this arrangement's not working for me anymore, so I want it to be modified, and here's the reasons why. Another tip that I give my clients when they're in those types of situations is to also consult with a business attorney that deals specifically with business arrangements, because they may have some insights that I may not be privy to, or unique or creative solutions in how, a contract is drawn up post-divorce.
Another situation that I think is unique compared to, I'll say regular divorces, is when one or both parties are in the military. And it sounds like, there's a lot of unique situations that fall under that guise. What's something that you see common with military divorces that might be unique to military divorces compared to your average divorce that people should be aware of before they go down that path?
Sure. Yeah. I think a lot of military cases, either they're a military spouse, military member, or even veterans, there are protections under the SCRA, or Service Member Relief Act, that a lot of times they kind of know of the idea or the concept, but they're not familiar with the details of what those protections are, especially if they are active duty, they're being deployed, they're in a combat zone. So to familiarize themselves with the SCRA is a great tip to start off. The other tip is also to know that just because they're an active duty military member does not preclude them. In fact, it's against public policy to say that your active duty and your career precludes you from having 50-50 custody, because it's just not true. But a lot of people think that, right? Like, well, I may get deployed, or I may not be available because I got to go to training. So the easy solution is I think I'm just going to get screwed in all this. I'm just going to agree to something lesser than 50-50. If that's something you want, it's something that can be worked out. Of course, there's going to be parameters that need to be addressed, like, well, what if there is a deployment, right? That is obviously to active duty military members, but those details can be worked out. And another thing that I would say is unique to military is they have benefits that they receive that are an asset to be addressed, right? Come time of divorce. So for example, they have, certain pension plans, they have VA benefits that are at issue. And there are certain parameters and qualifications that the federal government that controls, the laws related to the military members that we need to make sure as attorneys we are complying with, right? Because ultimately the federal law is going to trump the state level laws. So we always have to look to, okay, specifically, how are we making sure that these assets are being divided, but also complying with the federal laws related to that. Another thing is sometimes people are located because they have a 3-year contract in, for example, where I'm at in San Diego, but their home state is Texas or it's South Carolina. And so you have to address jurisdiction issues too. Like, hey, I actually own a property in another state, but I've just been here the past couple of years. And so those types of issues can also come up.
One of the things that happens, and that's very common in military situations, is mental illness, whether it be PTSD, they're diagnosed with bipolar, things of that nature. And I think that going back to something that you mentioned earlier, people just kind of giving in because of deployment, and they just assume that they can't get 50-50. I've seen it a lot where same thing, where because they've been diagnosed with something that they just think that disqualifies them in terms of 50-50, or in terms of, or maybe they've at times maybe pre-diagnosed or even afterwards, maybe they have been a bad actor in the marriage because of the diagnosis, which may have led to the divorce. And people think that means that it's just disqualifies you from having custody, from seeing your kids, those sorts of things. What do you tell people in those situations? They're the ones who might be struggling. I think a lot of people talk about when it's the other person, but not very many people talk about it when it's them, that I've been the one that has been struggling with PTSD and diagnosed, and I'm afraid that my significant other is going to take the kids or take the house or win the divorce. What happens in situations like that?
Sure. So interestingly enough, I would say about 40% of my clients, or maybe even more at this point, are military and or veterans. And I can't say this enough that I wish there was more promotion about the fact that it's okay to seek out help. And so I often will have those conversations with, clients that fall in that category, and essentially remind them that all the courts really care about is what's in the best interest of the children. And as long as they're seeking out help and they're addressing the issues that they have, including the PTSD, or as a result of the PTSD, now they're experiencing maybe substance abuse issues, then that's all the courts care about, is that they're recognizing that there's an issue there and they're seeking out the help that they need. And sometimes I'll have very real conversations with those types of clients and say, I'm seeing a few red flags here, but it's great that you're recognizing that these are these issues, but you need to be your own advocate, because if you want to be there, for example, if they have children, for your children, these are the steps that you need to take in order to make sure that you can still be an active role in their life. And sometimes they will fight it at first. But a lot of times, even if it's a few months later, they'll come back to me and say, I'm so happy that you pushed me to do that, because I realize now that I've gotten that help, I feel so much better. Or they've seen a better relationship with their children. Especially, I tend to see it with parents who have teenagers.
Yeah.
And these military members who have a very militant type background, right? Just based off of their training. One time I represented somebody who was a drill sergeant, right? So they were very much, everything is, followed to the T. And they have a lot of issues with their communications with their teenagers. And I will, send them resources like, parenting courses specifically for teens, and addressing that, the home life is going to be a little bit different than the work life, but here are some tools to kind of address that. And once I can kind of point out those patterns that I see with the client, I can tell that, although again, sometimes I get some initial resistance, it's super helpful for them in the future, because they can see I utilize those skills that I learned in that, for example, parenting class. And I have seen a difference in the way I'm communicating with, for example, my teenage daughter, right?
Yeah. It actually works.
Yeah.
And when people find out that it actually works, it actually gives you a lot more credibility.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, this has been absolutely amazing. I feel like we could talk, forever about this subject. And like you said, it definitely needs a lot more attention. So we're going to have you back on at some point in time. Can you tell people where they can find you at if they're interested in working with you, if they have a friend, family member, or they themselves want more information about you, want more information about your firm, or maybe they want to follow you on social media?
Yeah, sure. So my law firm's name is Cusrabadi and Hill, but our website is a little simpler, knhlawgroup.com. Our phone number is 858-434-1020. We're located in Mission Valley, San Diego. And again, we also assist people in other surrounding counties, I should say. And we are on Instagram and we are on TikTok. I think our handle is California Lawyer. I'm still new to TikTok. I am a millennial, but it's not really my thing.
So for those of you who are watching, those of you who are listening, all of her information will be down in the show notes down below as well. So also comment down below, comment whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening to this on Spotify or Apple. Make sure you comment, let us know something that you may have learned from today, a takeaway from today's episode, and also go over to her social media platforms and show her some love, give her a follow, and absolutely, work with them if you are in the San Diego area, if you're looking for an attorney. With all that being said, thank you all very much, and I will see you in the next episode. You guys have a good one.
Bye.